Hello and welcome. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon is about to arrive in Sri Lanka 4 days after the government declared victory in the long-running war with the Tamil Tiger rebels. He will visit government-controlled camps set up for the thousands of Tamil civilians who fled the fighting. There's increasing concern about their treatment. The United Nations says at least 280,000 are now being temporarily housed in 4 districts, the vast majority in Vavuniya. Ban Ki-moon will make a tour there and try to convince the government to lift restrictions on foreign aid workers going into the camps. Charles Haviland reports from the capital, Colombo.
For many Sri Lankans, this has been a week of joy and celebration. 26 years of war has ended. So too, they firmly believe, have the violence and the bomb outrages. That means less fear and new hope. But there's no jubilation in these government-controlled camps, set up for more than 250,000 Tamil civilians left homeless by months of fighting across the north. Apparently pulled onwards by the Tamil Tigers as the war front moved, some families were displaced at least 18 times, the United Nations says. Most of the camps are near the town of Vavuniya. It's here that Ban Ki-moon will come, to settlements that are overcrowded, short of sanitation, and which restrict their occupants' movements. The government says it must weed out Tamil Tiger members from ordinary people, but that it plans to resettle most people from the camps back to their villages within 6 months.
We know that we have to rehabilitate the northern parts of our country. We know that we have to get these people, the presently displaced persons, back to their villages.
Paving the way for Mr. Ban is his chief of staff, who's been visiting. Vijay Nambiar told reporters he'd seen a devastated land on flying over the final battle zone. He said it was possible that the subject of allegations of war crimes by both sides might be taken up in the UN Human Rights Council.
As far as the UN is concerned, where there are grave and systematic violations of international humanitarian law, these are things which will have to be looked at by the international community, by the United Nations, and we will look at specific cases as and when they are brought to the attention.
For all the UN's talk of war crimes investigations, President Mahinda Rajapaksa has today sounded a defiant note, saying he's not afraid of war crimes tribunals or even of walking up to a gallows, and claiming he has the strength and confidence of his people. Charles Haviland, BBC News, Colombo.
Talk about the situation more in Sri Lanka. Joining us now from New York is Steve Crawshaw from the Human Rights Watch organisation that's been trying to monitor what's going on in the country. Steve Crawshaw, first of all, let's look at the camps. How important is it, do you think, that the UN does try to get unrestricted access for those foreign NGOs to go into these camps?
I think it's extraordinarily important. It's been really a very serious abuse that for all these recent months there's been a great failure to let people in. Now, absolutely, there should be full and unrestricted access. I think it's extraordinary the government is refusing to provide that even now. It obviously has very serious humanitarian consequences for the hundreds of thousands who are still there in what, in effect, are internment camps. There's no other way that really they can be described.
OK, well, Tamils in the diaspora have been complaining very loudly about the treatment of these civilians in the camp, saying that they lack medicine, they lack water, and that families are being separated, children from 1 or 2 parents even.
That's absolutely correct. What we're hearing from humanitarian agencies is repeatedly those kind of evidence that you've just described. And certainly when we, Human Rights Watch, have been in, we had to, if you like, slip in. We didn't have permission to be there, but certainly we were finding very grave circumstances before, and that continues to be the case. It is clear that the Tamil Tigers themselves committed very serious abuses. So on one level you have the right to look at those who may have committed abuses or be committing them, but what is happening to ordinary uninvolved civilians is clearly unacceptable.
But when the government at this point has put to the Sri Lankan government, they say, look, a war has been going on in this region for a very long time. There are lots of infiltrators from the Tiger rebels going into these camps. We've got to make sure we have adequate screening. That's why we've got to have the barbed wire around these people for their own protection.
there are very basic rules that apply which Sri Lanka has simply trampled again and again, and they apply some very clear rules which apply for internally displaced persons and how they should be treated and the free movement they should be allowed. Sri Lanka has simply ignored that again and again, and so both on a legal and a moral and a human basis, but also, it must be said, also on a political basis, you cannot go on treating people like this and expect life to return to normal. If you want a new normality, you have to abide by the, if you like, the decent rules of humanity, but also ones have been codified under international law.
Okay, and looking at the war zone, I mean, one UN official apparently has flown over and talked about great devastation there. It's very important to find out what's going on there. Again, Tamils abroad are saying, look, there have been thousands of Tamils who've been killed. Do you have any idea what went on in the war zone?
There have indeed been thousands that have been killed. The UN's own figures suggest that probably more than 7,000 civilians have died there. Now, on the one hand, we've had a range of very, very serious abuses taking place by the Tamil Tigers, the rebel group now defeated, who were repeatedly using the civilians, for example, as human shields in a quite inhuman and illegal way, also the use of child soldiers. But by the government forces, we saw repeated heavy shelling into an area which they were describing as no-fire zone, and that was really an entirely inaccurate description. They denied shelling, but they actually continued that heavy shelling with many, many civilian casualties. That clearly needs to be addressed, and I very much welcome the fact that we're now hearing from senior UN officials the fact that there may be some kind of accountability, a commission of inquiry, to look into the very serious abuses committed by both sides.
And on that point, briefly, very important though that monitors go in very quickly.
Everything, it is extraordinarily urgent what we're seeing. What we're seeing at the moment is a Sri Lankan government playing a delaying tactic. I think they want to present it all as a victory lap, if you like, to say that we have reached the end of a war after 20 years. Well, yes, on the one hand, it is good that the conflict itself may be over after 20 years, but to brush under the table what has been happening and what continues to happening is simply unacceptable. One other great concern is that of forced disappearances. We've seen repeatedly by the Sri Lankan government in the past. We need to be very, very wary that that should not be happening now, including to witnesses like the doctors who gave such important evidence from inside the fighting zone.
Steve Crawshaw from Human Rights Watch, thanks very much. Now let's take a look